Good evening, friends, and we are back here again. Sorry for these technical challenges that we faced because of the delay, and we are going to have a very interesting evening on laughter. You can see these four lovely people on screen. That includes me as well, and I would love to request Lina Asher to introduce our guest for the evening.
My dear friend Fahad, what can one say? Wit, good looks, intelligence. He's got the whole package, and he's got a gorgeous wife. And you have all met his gorgeous wife on screen before, Simone Singh, on an earlier Moonshot conversation. This is the other half of my favorite couple. I want to read out a quote from his book. Don't allow your heart to play games with your head. Stay focused on and in the present. Otherwise, all you would do is scuttle your dreams. And that should be our tagline for Dream Shapers that we're about to launch. Yes, he's the most celebrated best-selling author of two great books, Scandal Point and Flashpoint. As a reader, I truly feel grateful that he loves to write. And as a friend, I'm truly, truly grateful that he counts me in his inner circle, and he's absolutely in the epicenter of my inner circle. So, Fahad, take it away as our gracious host today.
Thank you so much, Lina. Welcome, Fahad, and let me introduce our guest with a lot of pleasure. I would like to introduce to you Anuvab Pal, friends. We feel very proud when BBC calls him India's answer to British wit. In fact, we can ask the man himself today, Anuvab Pal, the man who has changed the face of Indian stand-up comedy. The New York Times calls Anuvab Pal India's most intelligent comedian, and I'm sure you'll get a glimpse of why in our conversation today. So, friends, over to you, Fahad and Anuvab Pal.
Well, listen, I'm truly, truly delighted to be doing this with you, Anuvab, because God knows, one is completely adored not only all your writing as a screenplay writer, and then again with all your plays, which I've had the pleasure of seeing staged. Then we get into your web series and now radio shows with the great Stephen Fry coming up. So this is just a magical, mercurial trajectory. And I wanted to A, congratulate you, but B, also to say that now you are very much in the business of comedy, and it's serious business. And in all of this, do you really see sort of comedy and the responsibility of making people laugh as a process of healing? And what is your sort of thought process while you are doing this very serious business of making others laugh?
So I'm going to start by, we should tell the audience that there is some nepotism going on here because I'm a fan of yours. We've known each other a long time. I was writing plays when you were directing them. You've written a book I've loved called Scandal Point, which is very funny, very witty, biting, a sort of Oscar Wildean view of upper middle class life in India. And we share a very good sense of humor. So, you have the sense of humor. I try to emulate one. But
yes,
I loved Scandal Point when I read it. But I spent a large amount of time trying to figure out who specifically you were talking about in Bombay, rather than focus on the structure of the narrative. And I think it was 2004 or 5 when I think that was sort of like, I kind of felt like that was Bombay in a very sort of Paris of the 1920s kind of thing, like lots of artists were starting out. You were already doing TV and it was sort of the cusp of those MTV years, but you were also directing for the stage, you were writing books, and it seemed like there was a boom in publishing, in film, PVR, multiplexes just opened, lots of foreigners in India. Bandra, where I lived, was filled with expats. It seemed like, I'm digressing. I get from the point of comedy, but I think that's where it all began. I think stand-up. Prior to that, I've heard that you would know. I'm a sort of late Mumbai resident. I came here sort of as a like an immigrant, like many do, for a transactional reasons, right? Because I was doing films and I was writing. But you know Bombay more intimately. You're from here. So I've heard that prior to that sort of 2005 boom, there was some stand-up, like it would happen at not Jazz by the Bay and places like that, but there was nothing formal.
Yeah. Well,
And I think
definitely. By the way, and if not by the bay, because exactly, I mean, the notion of being a professional stand-up comedian, and this is where I'm filled with admiration for you because you just do it so well, and that sort of acerbic observations, and this is it. I mean, social satire, stuff like this that we all exult in, and I think what's phenomenal is to be able to take it to such a large audience, and for having people completely having that resonate, and so therefore more power to you with that. And where do you see yourself in this thing, in terms of, like I said, the business of making people laugh?
so. I think two things. I mean, in the business of comedy, there were, of course, people like Veet Das and Papa CJ who were doing this for quite a while, and corporate events. I was much more interested in a sort of generation of Indians. I think
Yes.
people like us, and maybe people slightly older than us, who kind of grew up in this hybrid India, one which was always about, speaking with the right diction, saying the right things. Progress in India meant that you had to speak English and have a certain amount of Western decorum in how you dealt with the world, right? I mean, you yourself have a clip British accent. Like all of us sort of, this was imbibed in us, this sort of value system of what is,
Inculcated, absolutely, yeah.
like a please and excuse me and thank you. And I sort of found in this new India, one side was very digital and American, like kids today, very sort of Instagram reels. And then there was sort of this other very, proudly non-English speaking kind of stuff that you see in these gangster series on Amazon, like, proud of sort of being, from the earth, like from,
Yes.
Varanasi, and like off the soil. And I felt like, we were almost nobody in our own country. Like we were, our
Yeah.
points of view were, we're like zoo animals. We speak a certain way, we live within our little clique. And in many ways, I think both of us are sort of interested in satirizing that kind of sort of society. Like how we make do with our little island.
Yeah.
Um, and the schools we send kids to, the values we inculcate, as if the country outside doesn't matter. Like, uh, I mean, I'll give you an example. The other day, I recently went on a trip to Hampi in Karnataka to see some ruins. And somebody I mentioned, some city person in Delhi, and they said, "Is it dangerous? Is it, is the road, will we get murdered?" So like all our worlds is because this person,
Yes.
their world is between, Amrita
The
Sher Mark
disconnect.
and Gymkhana at, the mall that sells them their Fendi. So outside that world, it's, and I'm
Yeah.
quite fascinated by that aspect of us. And it drives a lot of my writing. And also in the UK, I'm equally fascinated by the similar aspect of that in terms of what they left behind. And I kind of hold them responsible for making us like this. So,
Yes. But having said that, I mean, where did you really find comedy and humor to become your sort of passion and purpose? Because at what age did you think that this could actually be your calling? And is this something that you felt that you were born to do, or it just came upon you, or it's just organically?
I mean, I was always interested in humor. A lot of the films I grew up with were so serious, right? Like a lot of us are stuff on stage. There's a lot of our art house films. Lots of sort of people drinking and getting divorced and killing people. There's a lot of anger, and the reality of my India, and I'm sure your India, is that, yeah, I mean there is anger, but it isn't like boiling all the time. Like the minutiae of our observations, what people say, and
Yes.
what people do is, to me, is far more interesting. I mean, again, I'm giving this recent example from a trip because it's just fresh in my mind. So I was taking this tour of Hampi, and the tour guide said, the king had 9 wives. He had his main wife, but then obviously he had another wife who was a dancer, but obviously because she was a dancer, he couldn't make her a queen. And I said, obviously. And he
And
said
that's
he
why
had,
they call that's why they call it Humpy, because there was
yeah,
so much of it going on.
had
Yeah.
quite a range of choices there. And he
Yeah.
said he had 7 other wives for relaxation. And so then I just asked him, which of us don't, right? And he didn't find it funny. And he just looked at me and he said, "See, it's not his fault. There was no television." And I just said that this is what I mean. And he said it completely seriously. And I think that if you allow the country to be funny, this is a very funny country.
Yeah, but it's like when people ask me how many years did you spend researching, your novels, and I said all my life. I mean, give or take about 40 years, because every day there's something so profoundly ridiculous in the mundane, and also the kind of shenanigans and things that we see around us, and therefore the number of people who've come up to me and said, who is this about? And I often turn to them very, with a cocktail glass in my hand, saying it is about you, because it's in fact about you, just how profoundly ridiculous you are, and the kind of
and they don't get literature, right? I remember us having a conversation when the book came out, and I said, it's so brilliantly observed. And I think you said something very clever to me at the time. You said, all I had to do is just show up, and like that is the great power of observation that you had in that book, which is, you just look to these people, and all the great novelists like F. Scott Fitzgerald, he was writing about that time and rich people of his time. Truman Capote, all these great writers. It's just that I guess we often in India are so interested in what's going on in America or Britain, elsewhere. We don't observe like what's immediately around us. And just like you proved with your book, if you just document those things, a lot of our job is done. And you provide your own observation to it, and the readers often don't realize that it's them.
Yeah, and I think with especially your stand-up comedy, just the detailing and the nuance, that is really what resonates with people, and beautifully, across the pond. I mean, many ponds, but you've had such success in Britain and in the UK with this, because people just, I think, enjoy having a mirror held up to them, and they understand that sometimes it takes an outsider. So if a Trevor Noah, for instance, is doing so well, as being the successor to the great Jon Stewart, is because you have a South African person looking out into the absurdity that is America, and there's great fodder for humor there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, again, some of that is driven by some of our sort of post-colonial hangover. When I'm sure you remember when we were kids, if some kid showed up and the parents said, my son has learned violin from the Trinity School of Music. It was a big thing.
Yes. Yes.
My son is a violinist. He said, but he's also a murderer. But no, he's a violinist from the Trinity School of Music. So I think that a lot of what drove me to the UK was that hangover. That, and I'm Bengali, so British approval is a very big thing. Like it's
absolutely, yeah. The whole Bhadralok, the Boxwala, and I think just that what you bring to it. And you did a marvelous cameo in Meera Nair's Suitable Boy, where you played a Boxwala, which was so good, so good. Just sending out. Yeah, exactly. We believe in the Bata system. Yes.
Yeah, but again, it's a kind of India. I think we hold on to it. I think the only place we can sort of hold on to it is this sort of comedy and literature, and in pockets abroad. Like in Australia and in England and places like that. I think if you speak to this generation of Indians, I once did a show in Bangalore and I asked this kid. And he said, at first he called me uncle, which is fair enough because I'm probably one of the oldest comedians in the circuit. He said, uncle, I didn't know all this about the British in India. Thank you for telling us. So I said, how do you think we speak English? So he said, Facebook. So like this generation just takes a certain kind of India for granted, right? Like they were just born into it. They've always had Instagram. They've always had Facebook. They'll always have food delivery. Like they don't, they're not aware of sort of a Sindhi tailor who'll make you a British suit, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And the incongruity of it is taken for granted. But, coming to kids, I mean, obviously you represent a marvelous inspiration for a lot of people to think that you can take humor and to have an inherent sort of sense of the absurd and to monetize that into a professional career. Now, obviously, there's a there's a lot more than just having the ability to observe and articulate into it. But what would be your advice to kids who would want to take this up? Because as you said, this was inconceivable even while we were growing up. This is not something that you would consider a career option. Today, even in my show, Four More Shots Please, I played the role of a father to a girl who finds herself, who's lost and who finds herself as a stand-up comedian.
So by the way, I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed, and I saw you saying those lines, and I was like, Farhad is the opposite of that person. He's not this human at all. But again, that's good acting. You're a great actor. Manvi Guru plays a comedian in that, and that track is but it's a really, really good question, Fahad. There are professions today that just did not exist. Like today, some kid could make a vast amount of money as an Instagram influencer, right? Like what do you even advise? What advice do you give that person? Like, what does it even mean to be a doctor and an engineer or lawyer? What does it even mean, right? In 2021,
or many of them still see themselves as influencers, and
and they're spreading
yes.
influencers. They are spreading. I mean, they're million. I mean, my cousin is actually a great example. He came out of college. He's quite a well-known comedian in Calcutta, and he has millions and millions of followers, and all these girls are crazy about him. And what he does is he does these little like silly videos in Calcutta about, like what kind of food do Bengalis love. Like he'll make a little video and it'll have some 6 million views, and it'll have him like, eating something very quickly in a boomerang, or like a 10-second where he's just doing this. So, but someone's paying him to do this, right?
Yeah.
Like, so my aunt and uncle were like, go to college, become this. And my advice to him was, why? I mean, he went to college, he got a degree, but, social media platforms are saying, give us a 10-second video where you just go, wah, and we'll pay you. Why would he not, right? Like, and I'm not saying give up your education, don't do that, because we do have a lot of people listening to us who are kids who would want alternative careers. But I would definitely say, put in the rigor, because academics is a great discipline, because you learn about the world, and I'm sure you'll advise that, Fahad, right? Like a good education gave you, I'm sure, the foundations to at least, read something and say, this is terrible grammar, or just basics of, this is bad writing, but beyond that, I think just becoming an investment banker or a lawyer, like in the old days, when we knew nothing about these, we just say these things, right? I want to work in a hedge fund. We don't even know what we're saying because we're 16 or 17. I think kids nowadays are much smarter. They're exploring. And, I am not even on the higher end of the totem pole with comedians. I do some work in the UK. No, seriously, I mean, I have a career, I'm known, and I'm grateful for it. But there are comedians right now who have made, if kids are hearing this, who have made enough money, which is the size like of a small business that employs 20 people. So it is possible to reach that level of success. I'm probably sort of in the middle, but so you could achieve really big things. There are comedians in India like Zakir Khan who've sold out stadiums, so
and some who still sell samosas in stadiums.
Both sides. There's both sides, right? Like, and the pandemic has been really rough, etc. But so there are both sides of the equation. But just like I think it's wrong for parents to say, no, just be serious or whatever and do other things. I think it's equally wrong to not pursue these things. So if you do find you have a knack for this, I think somehow in life you will end up doing what you were meant to do, right? Like, you were directing plays, you ran successful businesses, but you always knew that there's a book in you, right? You always knew you wanted to direct a play. You always knew these things. And when you manifest them, people are like, that's really good, like, and then you get more opportunities, etc. So I think, I don't think you would have sort of enjoyed your life if you had not ventured into these sides, if you had stuck to just a kind of business, etc.
And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is a golden age and an opportunity for kids, particularly because the show goes out to a lot of kids and parents who to understand that this really is this golden age that we live in, where you can actually try and do something, follow your heart, follow your passion, whether it is being an influencer, whether it is actually, a stand-up comic or whatever. But there's a wide array of things available to you. And as you said, if people are willing to throw money at you for doing funny things on camera, then more power to you. It would be foolish to dissuade, someone.
I mean, how can you tell that kid take your chartered accountancy exam when someone is paying him 5 lakhs to eat an apple on Instagram? Like what?
Yes.
Like you'll be silly, right? Like, just be like, do it.
I mean, don't bother creating apple, just eat an apple.
Because that's what I'm saying. That's how it's gotten, I mean, some of your cast in Four More Shots, Please, they are a great cast, wonderful actors, but they also have huge followings on Instagram, right? Like they endorse products. And I mean, it's a thing now in India, right? Comedians have become so on YouTube. You don't even need permission for someone to say you're good, right? Like imagine the years when we were sort of struggling. You'd have to put up a play at NCPA, sell tickets. The public would have to approve of your existence. A theater company, a big theater company would have to say, yes, I believe in this person. There were so many gatekeepers. Now some 19-year-old kid can put up a YouTube clip of a comedy about his parents and get 20 million views, and he's done. He's on his way.
Yeah. Now, speaking of humor across the world, and particularly since you've had such success internationally, what are the kind of, how would you sort of define humor in different, do you sort of cater it or tailor it to the audience in certain regions? Do you see a sort of a lingua franca of humor, or do you see that there are sort of, different languages and different dialects of humor that you need to use in order to connect with your audience?
The most interesting lesson in that regard was when I played 5 nights in Oslo. They'd never had an Indian comedian in Oslo. And I did 5 nights in Norway to an entirely Norwegian audience, 300 people each night. And I was petrified, right? What am I going to say to Norwegians? First thing was the language, right? Like, I'm going to be speaking in English and with a slight accent, right? Because I don't even look like I come from like a Western English country. I don't look American in the traditional American sense. I don't look British in traditional British sense.
Yes.
And I said, how do I deal with this? So I was told, no, Scandinavia audiences are completely English speaking, so you'll have no problem. Great. And then I said, the best way you can go with this is to be authentic, right? Is to tell your story and then compare sort of things you have in your country with their country, right? Like I found out that 60% of Oslo are unmarried. Like they're single and they don't even partners. They choose to be partners, but not married because they just think it's an old idea, right? And I think what a lovely sort of country to contrast that to our obsession with large marriages, right? And our obsession with forcing kids to get married when they're 15.
Brilliant. Yeah.
So I just feel like if we are authentic, to the stories we tell, the world is very interested. I mean, this is sounding like a TED talk. I apologize, but the world is very interested in like our perspective on things versus how they do it. Like I find it very hard to show up in a country and say, except the UK, because we know a little bit about the history. Any other country to show up and say, these are the things that are wrong with your country, or these are the things that are ridiculous in your country. Because I don't know, I haven't spent enough time.
It's vital to have a brown man come to your country and tell you what is wrong with you.
Just think, can you imagine, right? Like how they'd feel if I did that. Hello?
I think Anuvab, his internet is having a challenge. No problems, Anuvab.
Oh, he's back.
He's back. He's back. He's back.
Are we back? Anuvab, I find you frozen, delightfully frozen on my screen. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you perfectly. Am I still frozen?
No, now you have unfrozen.
But you raised a very good point, right? You raised a really interesting point about how do we go to a different country and tell them, like, how would we feel? I think that's how I look at it also. How would we feel if Trevor Noah came to India and said, these are the 12 things that he does one concert, say in Bombay at NSCI, sells 500,000 tickets, and then Trevor Noah Seinfeld gives us a lecture on why, he's better than India, Indian things. We'd be like,
Right.
how arrogant, right? Like,
Yeah.
what?
Yeah.
So I always feel like it's interesting to talk about differences, between cultures and stuff. And also like the nuances that I notice about, like for example, when 5 Americans go out for dinner, and I'm sure you've noticed this, or 5 British people go out for dinner, no matter what their economic status is, they'll divide the bill exactly.
Yes.
They'll be like, oh, you had the salad, he had the salmon, it's 14.50. They'll do the mathematics, it's 22.
Yes.
In India, whether you can afford it or not, for some guy will throw down a card, right? Like, it's just how we live, right?
And get into, and depending on how much alcohol has been consumed, it gets extremely vociferous. This business of who will pay the bill.
And it gets violent because one guy wants to do it, right? Like he's like, I won't let all these others. They don't divide it equally. Then they start threatening the waiter, saying, "Do you know who I am?" That poor waiter is lost because there are 5 cards. He doesn't know who to.
तू जानता है मेरा बाप कौन है? आप नहीं जानते तो मैं कैसे जानूंगा?
I feel like you have been in a restaurant incident like this, surrounded by Uber Alpha people who want to pay.
Yes.
It's and then they'll try to block the friend and say, no, you can't pay, man, you can't, and they'll give their card, don't take it from him. They'll do this.
Completely proportionate to the amount of alcohol that has been consumed. Completely
correct. And then they'll be
going to India. I didn't mean to interject. But this sort of brings me to India and humor within, because of course this vast and great land of ours, between the Bengali humor, which I absolutely love, to the sort of South Indian, whether it's Tamil humor. Leena and Nello Rajesh talked about it last week on their show. Everyone, their different regions are more sort of the broad-based humor of the north, of the Punjabi. How do you sort of deal with that? You tap into different nuances of that in your shows, and you tailor make them to whom you're speaking.
I do to some extent, but I think you've done book readings all over India, and I want to know, what do you think of this, Fahad? Would you agree that there is a kind of upper middle class Indian humor that almost transcends local cultures and cities?
Absolutely.
And the way I look at that is Shashi Tharoor's fandom. Like Shashi Tharoor has a fandom that transcends regional cultures. He's just like an urban Indian celebrity. The same conversations that are happening about him in Delhi are happening in Bombay, are happening in Chennai, are happening in Calcutta, and they're all like, he's so articulate. Those households in Assam, everyone, that pocket of India are all sitting drinking their whiskey and having that same chat. And I feel like we cater to that demographic somehow.
Sure. But then again, the enormous success of the Zakir Hussains and the others that you talk about, who are really talking to the heartland, to and those, I think, are the kind of people who can really fill stadiums, because finally India and Indians want to be spoken to in a language, in an idiom that they understand. And this is where we were talking about the gangs of Wasipur and these UP Badland kind of movies, or the small town, the small town Indian film that has now become so much in vogue, and is these small films just resonating widely with I think. So I think we're seeing a huge shift in the country. We're also seeing a huge shift in the lack of tolerance in our country, and where comedians are being actually made state guests, at Tihar and things for even threatening to have told a joke. Now this is a pretty daunting prospect, and I wanted to ask you what you feel. Maybe not even personally, but at maybe a macro level, of the role of the comedian, the responsibility of an artist, a stand-up comic, a social observer. Do you think it's an obligation to use satire, to use ridicule to actually call out people to hold a mirror up to society, or is it just wiser to take your check and go home and make observations about other things that don't involve politics and things that matter?
So two really really interesting questions, right? So I'll answer the first part first, which is that I think you can only be the kind of comedian that's authentically who you are, right? Like, Fahad, if you grew up in South Bombay and you had a sort of world of yours, right, and you suddenly started writing books about, being from Lakhisarai in Bihar, just because there are more readers of that, it would seem inauthentic, right? So Zakir Khan telling stories about being from Indore and coming to Delhi as a single man, many in Hindi, much bigger audience for that. And I'm going to answer very quickly because I see Lena and Agnello have joined us. So I think that we've got a time issue. And the second thing is, if you are a comedian, like say a Kunal Kamra, where politics is in your comedy, you have to do it. Then I think there's no way you can be stopped, right? You will do it because, you look forward to going to jail maybe, but if you are a comedian that is just doing politics just to get attention, then people can tell. People. I heard this one joke that you would like, Fahad. It said that if this trend continues, then that poor comedian, he was in jail in Bhopal, I think, and it said that he doesn't have to worry. Bhopal Central Jail can become the new comedy store because at least he'll have a captive audience.
Indeed, indeed. And, I think what Lina and Agnello, Rajesh, I know we're going to wrap up, but when they were talking about the power of humor, Lina sort of mentioned that women find people with a sense of humor, men with a sense of humor, far more, very attractive because they assume they're intelligent. And I just wanted to ask you whether you still need to carry a baseball bat or a taser at least to fend off all the women who are throwing themselves at you, because I can see that this is a huge problem.
So great question. Great question. I think the tasers and the bats are coming towards me, usually for people asking for a refund for their shows, and some of those people are women. So I don't know. The demand for slightly balding 41-year-old middle-aged comedians that live between Mumbai and London suburbs is limited. But if you are aware where such humans exist, please let me know. But given that you have had a glamorous you are one half of a glamorous couple for many many years. You can tell me, as I have been been with somebody for a very long time. You can tell me, does it work? Does humor work? For me, it doesn't, because the jokes have been heard and are often repeated back to me, and my punchline is told to me, and then I'm told to shut up and take out the garbage. But does it still work?
Buddy, please, you're preaching to the choir. We're in the same boat. So, Lena, while in principle what you say is true, unfortunately, here are two people, purportedly funny people, who find this slightly suspect.
I think our partners look at us and just say, at least they're alive and not in jail for tax fraud.
Yeah.
What more do we want? It's 40, that's good enough. And maybe, Lena, next time we'll get a handsome single man, woman comedian, and they will have a different story to tell.
Yes.
Well, thank you guys so much. I mean, it's a great follow-up to the science and the power of humor and wit and laughter. And thank you guys so much for coming onto the show and
thank you. Thank you so much.
I'm a big fan of young people, and I have for the longest time been a big fan of this modest gentleman on my left. So it was a pleasure to do this.
Thank you, and likewise. What a wonderful mutual admiration society, and we must do more of this.
Correct. We only have a few years left, Fahad, so we got to make the best of it.
That is it.
So thank you, Fahad. Thank you, Anuvab, and thank you, Lena. That was a very interesting session, and I'm sure we all agree that laughter is the best medicine, and we all agree that we need to have more doses of laughter in our life. You don't need to be a comedian to do that, but definitely laughter is mandatory to make your life very interesting and exciting, especially during the current times. And we saw two great guys from the sector, Anuvab Pal, and a great author, and the way he articulated the entire show, Fahad. It was a pleasure listening to you guys, and I'm sure the audience has enjoyed it, made notes, and I'm sure they would also plan on making laughter a regular ingredient of their living life. Thank you so much. Have a lovely evening. Thank you, audience, for joining us, and we look forward to meeting you soon again. Thank you very much. Enjoy your Sunday.
Yeah.